I never thought a Tuesday morning in January would turn my entire life in Breckenridge, Colorado upside down. But there I was, staring at a fluorescent pink violation notice taped to my garage door like some kind of scarlet letter. My name is Quincy Anderson, and I have lived in the Silverpine Mountain Community for 8 years. I bought my property specifically because it sat on 40 acres bordering the national forest, with direct access to hundreds of miles of backcountry trails. The location was perfect for what I loved most: snowmobiling and maintaining the network of winter trails that wound through our valley. I had spent the better part of a decade grooming those trails with my equipment, creating pristine corridors for cross-country skiing, snowshoeing, and snowmobiling. The community loved it. At least, they used to. I grabbed the notice and read it 3 times before the words actually sank in. Violation of HOA Covenant 14.7. Prohibited recreational vehicle storage. Your snowmobile and associated equipment must be removed from visible areas of your property within 72 hours or face daily fines of $150. My snowmobile sat exactly where it had been parked for 8 winters, next to my garage on a concrete pad I had poured myself. The grooming equipment, a 12-foot drag that I pulled behind my machine to smooth the trails, rested on a trailer beside it. None of this was new. None of this had ever been a problem. I walked back into my house and immediately called the HOA office. A woman named Deborah answered, her voice dripping with the kind of false sweetness that made my teeth hurt. Silverpine Mountain Community Association, how may I help you? This is Quincy Anderson at 4782 Elk Ridge Road. I just found a violation notice on my door about my snowmobile. There must be some mistake. No mistake, Mr. Anderson. The board voted last week to enforce existing covenants more strictly. Recreational vehicles must be stored out of sight. Deborah, I have been parking this machine in the same spot for 8 years. Nobody said anything before. Well, the new board president is taking her responsibilities very seriously. All homeowners must comply. Who is the new president? Mrs. Patricia Hendricks. She was elected in November. I recognized the name immediately. Patricia Hendricks had moved into the community about 2 years ago with her husband, a semi-retired investment banker from Denver. She lived in one of the newer McMansions at the top of the development, the kind with floor-to-ceiling windows and a price tag north of $2 million. I had met her exactly twice, both times at community events where she had made it abundantly clear that she thought snowmobiles were noisy, dangerous, and lowered property values. So what am I supposed to do? I use that machine almost every day during winter. You will need to construct an enclosed storage building or rent space elsewhere. The covenant is quite clear. The covenant was written 20 years ago and has never been enforced this way. That is not my concern, Mr. Anderson. You have 72 hours. She hung up. I stood in my kitchen, phone still in hand, trying to wrap my head around this. Building a structure large enough to house my snowmobile and grooming equipment would cost at least $15,000, maybe more with permits and the requirements for mountain construction. Renting storage would mean hauling everything back and forth, adding hours to my routine. But more than the inconvenience, it was the principle. This was selective enforcement, plain and simple. That afternoon, I drove up to Patricia's house. It sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, all stone and timber and glass, with a circular driveway and landscaping that must have cost a fortune to install. I rang the doorbell and waited. Patricia opened the door wearing yoga pants and a fleece vest, her blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was probably in her early 50s, with the kind of maintained appearance that spoke of regular salon visits and personal trainers. "Can I help you?" she asked, not bothering to hide her annoyance. "Mrs. Hendricks, I am Quincy Anderson. I got a violation notice this morning about my snowmobile." "Oh, yes. Well, the board has decided to take a firmer stance on covenant violations. We need to maintain property values in this community. That machine has been parked there for 8 years without complaint. Just because something was overlooked before does not make it acceptable. The covenants clearly state that recreational vehicles must be stored out of sight. That includes snowmobiles, ATVs, boats, and trailers. I use that equipment to groom the community trails. You know, the trails that half the neighborhood uses for cross-country skiing." Patricia waved her hand dismissively. "That is very nice of you, but it does not exempt you from HOA rules. If you want to groom trails, that is your hobby, but you still need to follow the same rules as everyone else. Building storage will cost me 15 grand. Then perhaps you should have considered that before purchasing such equipment. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a meeting." She started to close the door. "Wait. Can we discuss this at the next board meeting? Maybe work out a compromise. The decision has been made, Mr. Anderson. You have 72 hours. This time she did close the door, leaving me standing on her perfect stone porch like a door-to-door salesman who had just been rejected. I drove home furious. The injustice of it burned in my chest. I had volunteered hundreds of hours maintaining those trails. I bought and maintained the grooming equipment with my own money. Every winter morning when there was fresh snow, I was out there at dawn, dragging that groomer behind my snowmobile, creating the smooth corduroy surface that made the trails perfect for skiing. The community never paid me a dime, never thanked me officially, but they sure used those trails. That evening I sat at my computer and pulled up the HOA covenants. I read through every page, taking notes. Patricia was technically right. Covenant 14.7 did prohibit recreational vehicle storage in visible areas. But I also found something interesting. The covenant said nothing about trail grooming being an official HOA service. It was something I did voluntarily, on my own property and the national forest land that bordered it. The HOA had no authority over those trails. They did not own them. They did not maintain them. They just benefited from my work. An idea began forming in my mind. The next morning, I started making calls. First, I contacted the county planning department about storage building requirements. The estimates I got back confirmed my fears. Between materials, labor, permits, and the engineering required for mountain construction, I was looking at $20,000 minimum. Money I did not have just lying around. Then I called a lawyer friend in Denver, Marcus Chen. We had gone to college together at Colorado State, and he specialized in property law. "Marcus, I need some advice about HOA covenants." "Oh boy, here we go. What did they do now?" I explained the situation. Marcus listened without interrupting, then laughed. "So let me get this straight. You have been maintaining community trails for free, and now they want to fine you for parking the equipment you used to do it." "Exactly. And these trails, they are not on HOA property, mostly national forest, with some easements through private land, including mine. Then here is my advice, completely off the record. You have no legal obligation to groom those trails. If you want to stop, stop. The HOA cannot force you to provide a service you volunteer for. As for the parking issue, they are technically within their rights if it is in the covenants. But selective enforcement is always tricky. When did they start enforcing this? Last week. New board president. Any other violations being cited? Not that I know of. Document everything. Take photos. Note dates. If this goes sideways, you might have a case for selective enforcement. But honestly, Quincy, fighting an HOA is expensive and exhausting. Sometimes the better revenge is letting them face the consequences of their own stupidity. His words stuck with me. Let them face the consequences. That afternoon, I took detailed photos of my property, including my snowmobile and grooming equipment. Then I drove through the community, documenting every possible covenant violation I could find. Brad Morrison had a boat in his driveway. The Hendersons had a basketball hoop mounted in their front yard, which violated the landscaping covenants. 3 houses had Christmas decorations still up in late January, past the allowed removal date. I found at least 15 violations, none of which had received notices. When I got home, I found another notice on my door. This one was a reminder that I had 48 hours remaining to comply. I sat on my porch that evening, watching the sun set over the mountains, and made my decision. If the HOA wanted to play hardball, fine. But I was done being their free trail maintenance service. The next morning, I loaded my snowmobile onto a trailer and drove it to a storage facility in Breckenridge, about 20 minutes away. The grooming equipment went too. It cost me $200 a month for a unit large enough to hold everything, plus the hassle of the drive, but I was in compliance with the HOA covenant. I took photos of my empty concrete pad and emailed them to the HOA office, along with a short message. Equipment removed as requested. Also, please be advised that I will no longer be providing volunteer trail grooming services, effective immediately. I did not expect a response, and I did not get one. For the next week, nothing happened. The weather stayed cold and we got a few inches of new snow. The trails began to deteriorate. Without regular grooming, snowmobile tracks cut deep ruts. Skiers created their own parallel paths that crossed and tangled. The beautiful corduroy surface disappeared under a mess of footprints and sled tracks. Then the complaints started. The first call came from Roger Peterson, a retired schoolteacher who skied the trails every morning. "Quincy, what happened to the trails? They are a disaster out there." "I am not grooming anymore, Roger." "What? Why not?" "The HOA made it clear they do not appreciate my equipment." "So I moved it and I decided to stop volunteering my time." "But everyone uses those trails." "I know. Maybe someone else will step up." He hung up sounding confused and upset. I felt a little bad, but not enough to change my mind. Roger was a nice guy, but he had never lifted a finger to help maintain the trails. None of them had. More calls came over the next few days. Neighbors I barely knew suddenly wanted to discuss the trail situation. I gave them all the same answer. The HOA did not want my snowmobile visible. Now it was not visible, and I was not grooming trails. 2 weeks after I moved my equipment, I got a call from Deborah at the HOA office. "Mr. Anderson, we have received numerous complaints about the trail conditions. That is unfortunate. The board is wondering when you will resume grooming." "I will not be resuming grooming." Silence on the other end. Then, "May I ask why?" The HOA made it clear that my equipment was unwelcome. I took that to heart. I have no desire to volunteer my time and money for a community that fines me for parking the tools I need to do that volunteer work. "I see. Well, perhaps we can discuss this with the board." There is nothing to discuss. The trails cross national forest and private land. The HOA has no authority over them, and I am under no obligation to maintain them. "Have a good day, Deborah." I hung up feeling satisfied. Maybe it was petty. Maybe it was childish, but it felt good to finally push back. The next board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening in early February. I was not planning to attend, but I received a certified letter requesting my presence. The letter was signed by Patricia Hendricks and said the board wished to discuss community trail maintenance. Fine. I would go, but I was not making any promises. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a log building near the entrance of the development. When I arrived at 7 in the evening, the parking lot was packed. Apparently, half the neighborhood had decided to show up. Inside, the room was set up with a long table at the front for the board members and rows of folding chairs facing it. Every chair was filled, with people standing along the walls. I found a spot near the back and waited. Patricia sat at the center of the board table, flanked by 4 other members. I recognized Tom Stevenson, a real estate agent who had always struck me as more interested in networking than governing. Beside him was Linda Morrison, wife of the guy with the boat in his driveway. The other 2 members were newer residents I did not know well. Patricia called the meeting to order and started with routine business: budget reports, landscaping contracts, snow removal for the main roads. People shifted impatiently in their seats. Everyone was there for one topic, and it was not asphalt maintenance. Finally, Patricia cleared her throat and said, "Now, we would like to address the situation with the community trails. As many of you know, Mr. Anderson has decided to stop grooming the trails that many residents use for recreation. This has caused significant complaints and concerns about property values and quality of life in Silverpine Mountain Community." I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. Patricia continued, "Mr. Anderson, would you like to explain your decision to the community?" I stood up, keeping my voice calm. "Happy to. For 8 years I have maintained those trails at my own expense. I own the snowmobile and grooming equipment. I pay for fuel, maintenance, and repairs. I spend approximately 10 to 15 hours per week in the winter months grooming. The HOA has never contributed financially to this effort, and I have never asked them to. I did it because I loved it and because I thought it benefited the community." Patricia started to interrupt, but I kept going. "3 weeks ago, the HOA, under your leadership, Mrs. Hendricks, cited me for a covenant violation because my snowmobile was parked beside my garage. Not in the street, not abandoned on a lawn, parked on a concrete pad on my own property where it had been parked for 8 years without complaint. You gave me 72 hours to move it or face $150 daily fines, so I moved it. And I decided that if the community did not want to see my equipment, they did not need to benefit from what that equipment does. That is my decision, and it is final." The room erupted. People started talking over each other, some shouting questions at me, others at the board. Roger Peterson stood up. "Patricia, this is ridiculous. Quincy has been doing us all a favor. Why would you cite him for that?" Patricia's face flushed. "The covenant is clear, Roger. Recreational vehicles must be stored out of sight. We cannot make exceptions." Linda Morrison added, "We have to maintain standards. If we let one person violate the rules, everyone will want exceptions." Someone in the crowd shouted, "What about Brad Morrison's boat?" "He has had that in his driveway for 2 months. Linda's face went pale. "That is different. He is selling it. The covenant says no recreational vehicles in driveways, period. How is that different?" The meeting descended into chaos. Patricia banged a gavel repeatedly, trying to restore order. Finally, people quieted down enough for her to speak. "This is unproductive. Mr. Anderson, the board would like to propose a compromise. If you resume grooming the trails, we will grant you a variance for your snowmobile parking." I shook my head. "No, no, no. You established that the covenant matters more than community benefit. Fine. The covenant is enforced, and I am in compliance. But I am not going to resume volunteering for a community that treats me like a rule breaker for doing them a favor. If the trails matter so much to everyone, the HOA can groom them." Tom Stevenson leaned forward. "The HOA does not have equipment for that." "Then buy some." A commercial grooming setup will run about $30,000. Add a snowmobile capable of pulling it, another 15 grand. Then you will need someone to operate it, either a volunteer or paid staff. Budget for fuel, maintenance, insurance, and storage should not be too hard. Patricia's jaw tightened. That is not in our budget. Then I guess the trails do not get groomed, not my problem. A woman in the front row stood up. Her name was Susan, and she had twin daughters who loved cross-country skiing. This is insane. Patricia, you created this problem. Just rescind the violation notice and let Quincy park his snowmobile. Problem solved. Patricia shook her head. We cannot selectively enforce covenants. It opens us up to legal liability. You are already selectively enforcing them, Roger shouted. Half the neighborhood has violations you are ignoring. The meeting went on for another hour, but nothing was resolved. Patricia refused to budge on the covenant enforcement. I refused to resume grooming without being able to park my equipment at home. The community was furious at both of us, but mostly at Patricia. When the meeting finally ended, several neighbors approached me in the parking lot. Roger grabbed my arm. Quincy, please reconsider. A lot of us depend on those trails. Roger, I am not trying to hurt anyone, but I am also not going to be treated like this. If the board wants to negotiate in good faith, I am willing to listen. But right now, they are more concerned with rules than reason. Susan joined us. What if we petition to remove Patricia from the board? That is up to you all, but it takes time, and I am not sure how much support you would get. A lot of people agree with strict covenant enforcement in theory, even if they hate the consequences. Over the next week, the trails got worse. We had a big storm that dropped 14 inches of powder, beautiful skiing conditions. But without grooming, the trails were almost unusable. The deep snow hid stumps and rocks. Snowmobilers who tried to ride without a groomed base got stuck constantly. Skiers could not get any glide on the uneven, chopped-up surface. The complaints to the HOA multiplied. I heard through the grapevine that Deborah was fielding dozens of calls per day. People were demanding action. Some wanted the HOA to fine me somehow, force me to groom. Others wanted Patricia removed. The community Facebook page turned into a war zone of arguments and accusations. Then things got worse for Patricia. Someone, I never found out who, started documenting every covenant violation in the community and filing formal complaints with the HOA. Suddenly, the Morrisons got cited for their boat. 3 families got notices about Christmas decorations. The Hendersons got hit for their basketball hoop. Even Patricia herself received a violation notice because her trash cans were visible from the street on a day that was not trash collection day. The irony was not lost on anyone. At the next board meeting in March, the room was even more packed than before. This time, the agenda included a proposal to amend the covenants to allow recreational vehicle parking under certain conditions. The proposal was clearly aimed at solving the standoff with me, but it was too little, too late as far as I was concerned. Patricia looked exhausted. The strain of the past month showed in her face. When she opened the floor to public comment, she was immediately hit with a barrage of criticism. One after another, residents stood up to complain. The trails were unusable. Property values were at risk. The strict enforcement policy was turning neighbor against neighbor. Several people openly called for Patricia's resignation. Linda Morrison tried to defend the board. We are simply enforcing the rules that everyone agreed to when they purchased property here. We cannot be blamed for people violating those rules. You are enforcing them selectively, someone shouted. You ignored violations for years, and suddenly you go after Quincy for parking a snowmobile he uses to help everyone. It is hypocritical. Tom Stevenson, apparently trying to play mediator, turned to me. Quincy, if we approve this amendment tonight, will you resume grooming? I stood up. No. The room went silent. No. Tom repeated, sounding genuinely shocked. No. You all seem to think this is just about where I can park my snowmobile. It is not. This is about respect. For 8 years, I maintained those trails because I loved this community. I put in time, money, and effort because it made me happy to do something good for my neighbors. And the moment the board decided to enforce some arbitrary rule, they did not come to me first. Didn't call and say, "Hey, we have a concern. Can we work something out?" They slapped a violation notice on my door and threatened me with fines. That told me everything I need to know about how this board views my contribution. So no, I am not going back to grooming. Not for this board. Patricia's face turned red. You are being childish, Mr. Anderson. You are punishing the entire community because of your ego. I am not punishing anyone. I am simply declining to volunteer. There is no rule that says I have to groom trails, no covenant that requires it. You want groomed trails. The HOA needs to take responsibility for it. Hire someone. Buy equipment. But stop expecting me to donate my time to a community that treats me like this. A man I did not know stood up. He was older, probably in his 70s, with a thick white beard. I am Richard Chen. I have lived in Silverpine for 15 years. I want to say something to everyone in this room. Quincy is right. We have all benefited from his work and we took it for granted. We never thanked him properly. We never offered to help with costs. We just assumed he would keep doing it forever. And now we are mad that he stopped. That is not fair. The man has every right to decide how he spends his time and money. If we want those trails maintained, we need to step up as a community. Stop blaming Quincy. Start figuring out a real solution. His words seemed to shift something in the room. People started nodding. The angry energy that had been directed at me began to redirect toward the board and toward the community's own complacency. Patricia tried to regain control. Fine. The board will research options for professional trail grooming. In the meantime, we still need to vote on the covenant amendment. The amendment passed 4-1, with only Patricia voting against it. It allowed recreational vehicles to be parked on residential property if they were screened from view by landscaping or stored on designated parking pads. Essentially, it would have allowed me to keep my snowmobile exactly where I had always kept it, but it did not matter. I was done. March turned into April and the snow began to melt. The trails became mud and slush, then bare ground. The season was over. I did not groom a single time after that January morning when I moved my equipment. I thought the issue would die down over the summer, but it did not. In June, the HOA held a special meeting to discuss trail maintenance going forward. They had gotten quotes from professional grooming services. The cheapest option was $5,000 per season for weekly grooming. That did not include storm response or the level of detailed maintenance I had been doing. The most expensive quote, for twice weekly grooming and storm response, was $18,000. The board proposed a special assessment of $250 per household to cover the costs. The proposal needed a majority vote from the community to pass. It failed. Badly. People did not want to pay. They had gotten spoiled by having free grooming for so long. Some argued that trail maintenance was not essential, that it should not be an HOA expense. Others said $250 was too much. A few people suggested forming a volunteer grooming committee, but when the sign-up sheet went around, only 3 people volunteered, and none of them owned equipment or knew how to operate it. By July, the HOA had dropped the idea entirely. There would be no professional grooming service. The trails would be left to nature. Patricia resigned from the board in August. I heard through the grapevine that the stress had gotten to her, and her husband wanted to spend more time traveling anyway. Linda Morrison took over as president, but she was much more hands-off. The aggressive covenant enforcement stopped. Most of the violation notices that had been issued were quietly dropped. I started to feel like maybe things could go back to normal. Then September came, and I got a letter from the HOA attorney. The letter accused me of deliberately sabotaging community amenities and acting in bad faith toward other homeowners. It claimed that by stopping grooming, I had caused a measurable decrease in property values, and that I could be held financially liable. The letter demanded that I either resume grooming or pay restitution in the amount of $25,000. I read the letter 3 times, my anger growing with each pass. This was insane. They were threatening to sue me for not volunteering. I immediately called Marcus Chen. "Marcus, they are threatening to sue me." "Who is?" "The HOA. They are saying I am liable for property value loss because I stopped grooming trails I was never required to groom in the first place." Marcus was silent for a moment, then he laughed. "They are bluffing. There is no legal basis for that. You cannot be sued for stopping a volunteer activity." "Are you sure?" "Positive. Tell you what, I will write a response letter. We will explain in very polite legal terms that they can shove this threat where the sun does not shine." "I appreciate that." Marcus drafted a response that essentially said, I had no legal obligation to groom trails, that the HOA had no standing to demand volunteer labor or financial compensation, and that any further threats would be considered harassment. He sent it certified mail. I did not hear anything back from the HOA attorney, but I did hear from other neighbors. Word had gotten around about the lawsuit threat, and people were furious. Not at me, but at the board. The general consensus was that the HOA had overreached and made a bad situation worse. In October, there was a vote to recall the entire board. It passed overwhelmingly. New board members were elected, including Roger Peterson as president. One of the first things the new board did was issue a formal apology to me at a community meeting. Roger read the statement. The Silverpine Mountain Community, HOA, acknowledges that Mr. Quincy Anderson provided exceptional volunteer service to this community for 8 years. The previous board's handling of covenant enforcement was inappropriate and failed to recognize Mr. Anderson's contributions. The current board extends its sincere apologies and hopes to rebuild trust with all homeowners. It was a nice gesture, but I still was not going to groom the trails. Roger called me after the meeting. "Quincy, I know you are still upset, but is there anything we can do to make this right?" "Roger, I appreciate the apology, but the issue is not just about getting an apology. It is about the fundamental lack of respect. For 8 years, I maintained those trails because I loved doing it. It was never about recognition or thanks. But the moment the board decided to go after me, they poisoned that. I cannot get that feeling back. Every time I would groom now, I would be thinking about the violation notices and the lawsuit threat. It would not be fun anymore. It would feel like an obligation, like something I am doing because I am expected to. And I do not want that. I understand, but people really miss the trails. Then the community needs to find another solution. Maybe someone else will step up. Maybe people will learn to enjoy ungroomed trails. I do not know, but it cannot be me anymore. Winter came again. November brought the first snow. By December, the backcountry was blanketed in white. My snowmobile stayed in storage. I did not even bring it home. I still went out in the backcountry, but I switched to split boarding, a type of snowboard that splits in half for hiking uphill. It was more work than riding a snowmobile, but I enjoyed the quiet and the solitude. The trails I had spent so many years grooming grew over with natural snow. They were still usable for skiing, just not as smooth. People adapted. Some neighbors stopped talking to me. They saw me as the guy who held the community hostage over a petty dispute. Others respected my decision and understood why I made it. A few people even apologized for not appreciating my work when I was doing it. Life went on. In February, something unexpected happened. A new resident, a guy named Jake Forrester who had just moved into the community, approached me at the local coffee shop in Breckenridge. "Are you Quincy Anderson?" "Yeah, that is me. I am Jake. Just bought a place in Silverpine. I heard about the trail situation. I am a snowmobile guy myself. Used to do trail maintenance back in Montana. I was wondering if you would be willing to show me the trail system, maybe give me some tips on grooming." I studied him. He looked to be in his mid-30s with a friendly face and an earnest demeanor. "You thinking about grooming the trails?" "Maybe. I have got the equipment. Brought my sled and drag with me when I moved. I like doing it. Keeps me busy, but I do not know the area and I do not want to step on any toes." We talked for over an hour. Jake had moved to Colorado for work, something in tech that he could do remotely. He loved the mountains and wanted to get involved in the community. He had no idea about the drama with the HOA, at least not the details. I told him everything. The violation notice, the fight with Patricia, the lawsuit threat, all of it. When I finished, Jake shook his head. "Man, that is rough. I do not blame you for walking away. But here is the thing. I am not you. I do not have that history. If I want to groom trails for my own enjoyment, the HOA cannot stop me, right? No, they cannot. The trails are mostly on national forest land. You can groom them if you want." "Cool. Then maybe I will. Not for the HOA, not for the community, just because I like it. If people benefit, great. If not, whatever." "Jake, a word of advice. Do not let them take advantage of you. If the HOA gives you grief, stand your ground, and do not expect thanks. People get used to nice things fast." He grinned. "Noted." Over the next few weeks, I started seeing groomed trails again. Jake was out there doing what I used to do. He did a good job. Not quite as meticulous as I had been, but solid. People noticed. The community Facebook page lit up with posts thanking the mystery groomer. When people found out it was Jake, he became an instant favorite in the neighborhood. He handled it better than I would have. He was friendly but clear that he was grooming for himself, not as a service. He did not commit to any schedule. If he felt like grooming, he groomed. If not, he did not. It was a healthier boundary than I had ever set. By March, the trails were in good shape again. Jake and I became friends. We rode together sometimes, exploring areas deeper in the national forest that I had not visited in years. It was nice to share the backcountry with someone who understood the appeal. The HOA, under Roger's leadership, left Jake alone. They learned their lesson. There were no violation notices. No demands. No expectations. Spring came again. The snow melted. Life in Silverpine Mountain Community settled into a new normal. One evening in April, I was sitting on my porch watching the sunset when Patricia Hendricks pulled into my driveway. I had not seen her in months, not since she resigned from the board. She got out of her car slowly, looking uncertain. "Quincy, do you have a minute?" "Sure." She walked up to the porch but did not sit down. "I wanted to apologize. I have been thinking about this for a long time, and I realize I handled everything wrong. I was new to the board, and I wanted to prove I could be a strong leader. I thought that meant enforcing rules, being firm, but I did not consider the human side. I did not think about what you were doing for the community or how my actions would affect you. I am sorry." I looked at her for a long moment. She seemed genuine, tired but genuine. "I appreciate that, Patricia. Really, that took guts to come here and say." I also want you to know that I never supported the lawsuit threat. That was Linda's idea and the attorney's. I thought it was ridiculous. By then, I had already decided to resign. I just wanted you to know that. Okay. Are you still angry? I thought about it. No, not angry. Disappointed maybe, but I am over it. Life is too short to hold grudges. She nodded. For what it is worth, I do miss the trails the way you kept them. Jake does a good job, but it is not the same. You had a real talent for it. Thanks. She left after that. I never spoke to her again, but I did not need to. The apology was enough to close that chapter. As summer turned to fall, I started thinking about the trails again. Not about grooming them, but about what they represented. For 8 years, they had been my project, my contribution to the community. Losing that had hurt more than I wanted to admit. But it had also taught me something important. You cannot pour yourself into something if you do not have boundaries. You cannot give endlessly without protecting your own well-being. Jake was maintaining the trails now, but on his terms. He was not trying to be a hero or a martyr. He just did what he loved and let the chips fall where they may. It was a healthier approach, and I respected him for it. When winter came around again, I finally brought my snowmobile home from storage. I parked it on the concrete pad beside my garage, exactly where it had always been. Nobody said a word. The HOA did not care. Patricia was gone. The covenant amendment had passed. Everything was fine. I did not groom the trails, but I rode them. Jake and I would meet up on weekends and explore the backcountry together. Sometimes other neighbors joined us. It became a casual, social thing rather than a solitary mission. One afternoon in January, Roger stopped by my house. "Quincy, got a minute?" "Sure, what is up?" "The board has been talking. We want to do something for you. Not because we expect anything, but because we never properly thanked you for what you did all those years. We took a collection from the community, and we want to give you this." He handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $4,000 and a handwritten card signed by dozens of neighbors. The card thanked me for my years of service and acknowledged that I had never been properly appreciated. I was genuinely touched. "Roger, this is really kind, but you did not have to do this. We know. But we wanted to. You gave a lot to this community and we let you down. This does not fix that, but it is a start." I looked at the check. $4,000. It would not even cover one winter's worth of fuel and maintenance costs, let alone the equipment. But that was not the point. The point was that people finally understood the value of what I had done. They saw it, acknowledged it, and wanted to make amends. "Thank you, Roger. This means a lot," he smiled. "We are also setting up a trail maintenance fund. Anyone who uses the trails can contribute. We are going to use it to help Jake with fuel costs, maybe buy him some new equipment. We want to support him the way we should have supported you." "That is a good idea. Maybe someday you will groom again. If you do, the fund is there for you too, but no pressure, no expectations. Just support if you want it." After Roger left, I sat on my porch with the card and the check. I read every signature. Some were from close friends. Some were from people I barely knew. All of them were sincere. For the first time in 2 years, I felt like I was part of the community again. Not because I was doing something for them, but because they finally saw me. That night I called Jake. "Hey, man. Roger stopped by today with a check from the community. Did you know about this?" "Yeah, I helped organize it. People felt bad about how things went down, wanted to do something. It was a good gesture." So, question, you ever think about grooming again? Not like before, but maybe just occasionally? I could use a hand sometimes, especially after big storms. I thought about it. The idea did not fill me with resentment anymore. The anger had faded. The bitterness was gone. What remained was just a love for the trails and the satisfaction of maintaining them. Maybe, let me think about it. No pressure, just thought I would ask. A few weeks later, we got a massive storm, 2 feet of powder overnight. Jake called me the next morning. "Dude, you see this snow? I am heading out to Groom. Want to join?" I looked out my window at the fresh snow sparkling in the morning sun. My snowmobile was fueled and ready. The grooming drag was in my garage, right where I could grab it. "Yeah, I will meet you at the trailhead in an hour." We spent the entire day grooming. It was hard work, cold and exhausting, but it was also exhilarating. The smooth corduroy trail stretched out behind us, perfect and pristine. By the time we finished, the sun was setting and we were both freezing and exhausted. "Man, that was awesome," Jake said, grinning. "Thanks for helping. Thanks for asking." We did it again the next week after another storm, and the week after that. It became an occasional thing, something I did when I felt like it, not an obligation, not a duty. Just something I enjoyed doing with a friend. The community noticed. People started thanking us, not in a demanding way, but genuinely. They appreciated it, and that appreciation made it feel good again. By the end of that winter, I realized something. The fight with the HOA had not ruined the trails for me. It had just forced me to reevaluate my relationship with them. I had been giving too much, expecting nothing and burning myself out. Now, with boundaries in place and support from the community, it was sustainable. It was fun again. Patricia's violation notice had changed everything. It had sparked a conflict that tore through the community and taught everyone some hard lessons. But in the end, those lessons made us stronger. The HOA learned to respect volunteers. The community learned not to take things for granted. And I learned to set boundaries and value my own time. As spring approached and the snow began to melt, Jake and I took one last ride through the trails. They were in beautiful shape, the best they had been in 2 years. "Think you will groom next winter?" Jake asked. "Probably." "If you are still doing it, I am not going anywhere." "Then yeah, I will help." We rode back to the trailhead in comfortable silence, the mountains rising around us, the sun warm on our faces. The fight was over. The anger was gone. What remained was just the love of the trails and the satisfaction of a job well done. Life in Silverpine Mountain Community was not perfect. The HOA still made questionable decisions sometimes. Neighbors still argued about covenants and rules. But there was a new understanding, a recognition that community was about more than enforcement. It was about respect, appreciation, and working together. And that was enough.